Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 184 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope everything is going good for you, and we appreciate you stopping by here tonight. Been a pretty good day so far. As if you've been able to get out, a little bit chilly to start out, but that's typical of springtime. It always usually starts out cool, then warms up throughout the day, and so a lot of things are growing. A lot of things are getting started out there, and so hopefully you've had a good day today and a good week as well. We appreciate you being with us here tonight. As we always do, we want to give you an invitation. If you're someone who is in the Portia area, then feel free to stop by and see us. We would love to talk with you, love to worship with you, and just fellowship one with another. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so we've got a class on the book of 1 Corinthians on Sunday morning and a class on the book of Acts on Wednesday night. And so if you're interested in either one of those, you'll come by and see us. And we would love to be with you in a class. And also, if you have any suggestions about your future episodes, if you have any, if you'd like to put in your thoughts, feel free to send those our way as well. We'd love to hear from you. And if you think of a series, if you think of a particular thing you'd like to have an episode on, then send that our way. Like I said, we'd love to hear what you think about the Bible studies that we do. But we got a couple of people here already. We got Jackie Henry. Hope that you are doing good. Hope everything is going your way, as well as the Dunlaps. They are here as well. Hope you guys are doing good. Always appreciate you guys stopping by here with us tonight. But tonight we are going to be in Judges chapter 3. Judges chapter 3. We're going to kind of continue our walk through the Judges as we're kind of studying them with a few episodes here. And last week we took a look at Othniel, the first judge that is mentioned. He is the relative of Caleb, and he was someone who rose up when Israel needed him. He was someone who was strong and very courageous, and he was able to overthrow the king of Mesopotamia and give Israel freedom from their oppression. And so the second one that was going to rise up is a man by the name of Ehud. And Ehud is going to be pretty unique, as most of these judges are. The judges that rise up in this book are typically not your stereotypical person. They're not someone who is cut from the normal mold, as you might say. But they are very unique. They are very... sometimes they're very out there, but they come up for a specific purpose in order to deliver Israel from their mode of oppression. And so Ehud is going to be someone who's going to fill that role as well, and he is known particularly for being left-handed. He is a Benjamite, and if you've read through the book of Judges, you know that the people of Benjamin, for some reason or another, had a lot of left-handed people. They were taught to use their left hand, I guess, early on, and they were very skilled with slingshots and with slings, or really with slings, and a lot of them were left-handed, and Ehud was one of these people. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, and he was left-handed as well. You might be left-handed, you probably know someone who is, but typically there's a lot more right-handed people out there, and this is going to play a role in the story of Ehud as well. But if you remember, back in verse 11 here in Judges chapter 3, it said after the events of Othniel, it said the land had rest for 40 years, and then Othniel died. And so this takes place 40 years after the story of Othniel, and the people of Israel, they seemed like they served God and they were doing well, at that onset. But after Othniel died, what happened to them? As we're going to see throughout this, book, they would follow this pattern. They would follow, this circuit, of being faithful to God And then, as soon as that person who delivered them was out of the picture, they would chase after these other gods as well. And we see this happen here with the story of Ehud. Starting in verse 12 here, as we'll read just a little bit, it says, "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. And so here we have a stage is set. We have kind of like the context, we have the environment in which this story of Ehud is going to take place. And if you remember, the the king of Mesopotamia up here in verse 7 that Othniel dealt with, he only oppressed Israel for 8 years. It was only 8 years that he oppressed Israel, but now it's gotten worse, because when Eglon, king of Moab, comes into power and he oppresses Israel, he does it for a total of 18 years. And so more than double what the last one was. And so as you see here down at the end of verse 14, it says, Israel served the king of Eglon, king of Moab, 18 years. And so you have the oppression of Israel getting longer, than the previous one. And they are still going to require somebody to rise up. As we said before, this is a very decentralized time in the history of Israel. They don't have a solid leader. They don't have a king. They don't have, someone to kind of lead the ship, steer the ship, as you might say. And they were kind of suffering for it. And we see this all throughout the book of Judges. And so, as the pattern suggests, and as you probably know, here in verse 15, it says, Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer. As he said, this is part of that pattern. Eventually, Israel realizes that there's only one way out of this. There's only one person who can bring them out of this oppression, and that is the Lord God. Continuously, God bails them out of these situations, and yet continuously, after a while, they let their guard down and they chase after these other things. And it's a pattern we see this in the book of Judges. We see this with Israel as a whole. When you take a look at the broader picture of the Old Testament. But if you zoom out even farther than that and take a look at humanity itself, sometimes we're a lot like this, and we will be faithful for a little bit, and then we start to forget about what God has done for us, about who God is, about what He can do in the future, and we start to slip away as well. But Israel was doing this, and it brings to mind that the need. It brings to mind the necessity for faithfulness and for consistency in your faith. We always talk about how once you are baptized into Christ, once you are raised up, you're that new person, that new Christian. That is a starting point of a life of serving Christ. It's not just the end, but it's the starting point for a time in which you can serve God and you can look forward to that promise of salvation in the future. And it's a wonderful time. But we know that once you do make that decision, there's still that hard road ahead. There's still that narrow road, that road that leads to righteousness that we have to walk. And so that is a struggle for all of us in order to walk that and to keep ourselves not only free from sin, but also at work for the kingdom of God. As we know, being a faithful servant of God, it's not just about avoiding sin, but it's about embracing what God has called us to do. And we can find those instructions all throughout the New Testament and in the Old Testament as well. But we can't just be, extremely faithful for, one day, but we need to be someone who is consistent, who is disciplined, who has that commitment that not only today, but also tomorrow, and also, you know, this week, and the days following, years, as we go along, as we continue through this life, that we're still going to serve God. It doesn't mean we're not going to slip up. We know that we do that, but we are committed to being a faithful Christian for our life, for the rest of our life, and we make that commitment, to God, because Israel, they forgot, pretty quickly, and we can too if we don't follow the warning that they had here. But here in verse 15, as it says, people finally realize who can actually affect their problem, who can fix their problem. And so it says, then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. And the people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, king of Moab. And so what usually happened, at this point in time in your world history is that a kingdom would conquer a weaker kingdom. They would attack them, with their army, and they would destabilize, their military. They would probably kill a lot of their warriors, kill a lot of their men that were there, and then they would basically, go back home and require that conquered nation to bring them tribute, to bring them taxes, to bring them, gifts, every so often. And if they don't bring those gifts, that tribute, then they'll come back to that place and, basically beat them up again and kill a lot of their people and destroy, their houses. And so that was the basic, kind of formula for how nations conquered each other, back then. The Romans did it through taxes. It appears that, Moab did it through tribute. And so that was kind of the pattern, for that. And so Eglon, he conquers Israel, and it seems to be pretty easy for him. And then he requires them to send tribute. And Gideon, or not Gideon, but Ehud here, is the man who is appointed by Israel to carry the tribute, to this king. And it makes special mention that he was, a Benjamite, and that he was a left-handed man. As he said, this is going to play a part, in the story. And he's going to have a conversation with the king in order to present, this tribute. And we're not told what that tribute was, if it was just gold or silver or what it was. It's not really important to the story, but Ehud was in charge of bringing this, to him. But very early on in the story, starting in verse 16, we see the intentions of Ehud are not really the typical thing. He's not intending for this to be a normal social call, as you might say. But he's planning something, much more deadly, as you say. In verse 16, it says, and Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And so this is described as a sword, but you might think of it as a large dagger, because this was not a very long, blade at all. A cubit is not a very long blade, but he makes himself, but he puts two edges on it. And the reason for that is because if you have just one side of it, if you just have a blade with with an edge on one side, that's for slashing, that's for cutting, or doing in that manner. But if you're going to stab something, then you need the edges on both sides of the blade. And so we can see what Ehud is intending to do here right away. He makes for himself a sword, which was not easy during this time. Especially when you take a look at the time that Israel was oppressed by the Philistines, they put this practice out a lot. They would try to heavily control the ability for Israel to make weapons, to make swords and spears and shields. And so this probably wasn't easy for Ehud to make. He had to do it in secret. He had to gather the materials for it. But he was able to make this sword with two edges. And so he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And so he conceals it, under his clothes. And so when he goes to present this tribute, he'll have it ready. And so in verse 17, it says, "And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And now Eglon was a very fat man." And so we kind of, the profile that we get of Eglon is that he was a very powerful king. He was probably pretty cruel, during his time, and he's also a very successful, king as well. And it says that he makes mention that he was a very, very fat man. He was someone who, and at this, time, somebody who was, overweight in this sense was seen as someone who was very successful, as someone who had a lot of wealth, and because a lot of the wealth of people were often tied up in agriculture and in the food they were able to acquire. And so the fact that Eglon was like this meant that he was a very wealthy, very successful person. And so it makes special mention of this. And so he is going to be the one to receive the tribute from Ehud. And so in verse 18 it says, "And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, 'I have a secret message for you, O king.' And he commanded silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence." And so we can see that Ehud was pretty crafty in his plan. He wasn't someone who was just going to go in there and, throw caution to the wind. But he had thought about this. He had planned this. And he was very crafty in what he was doing. And so he goes and he presents this tribute, to Eglon. And he sent away the people who carried the tribute. And so it was probably pretty substantial. Like I said, it could be, grain. It could be, vegetables, or it could be gold or silver or, wood or, hides or fur, or it could be, any number of things that they could have brought, as tribute. But you can see that it took a bunch of people in order to carry this. And so they followed Ehud there. And so they present the tribute. Ehud sends them away. And then, but when he is traveling back, as he gets to a place called Gilgal, a place where the idols were, he turns around and he comes back, to the king Eglon, and he says, "I have a secret message for you." He says, "I have a message that only you can hear, that only you are really worthy, to hear." And this was, of course, a plan, a ploy for him to get the king alone, and so that he could do what he was going to do. And it says that he commanded, silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence. And so because of the craftiness of Ehud, he's able to get himself alone, with, the king. And he still has that blade that is strapped, to his thigh. And so Ehud has very, very well planned out, this happening. And he is going to make this happen. And so in verse 20, it says, "And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, 'I have a message from God for you.' And he arose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand and took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly." And so we see his plan come to fruition. He says, "I have a secret message for you." And so the king sends everyone out, and it's just Ehud, and the king there. And he says, "I have a message from God, for you." And when he gets close to him, he takes out the blade and he basically assassinates, this king, right then and there. And Ehud was able to be a deliverer of Israel, not through just sheer might, not just through, the power of an army, but through his craftiness, through his planning and his deceitfulness, really here in this case. And you think of people such as Samson, who just through raw power, through raw strength, tried to deliver Israel. Ehud took a different approach. He was someone who was much more finesse in his strategy here. And so he came to him, and he finally accomplishes what he came here to do. And he has, killed, the king. And In verses 22 down through 23, we have kind of what happens after this, and what happens after he is assassinated, and then down through verses 24 and through 26, we have the reaction of the servants and how they were kind of perplexed at what was going on, and they didn't know what was happening. And eventually they come to, after a long time, they eventually realize that maybe we should go check on the king. And when they do, they find him dead. They're being killed. But it shows, highlights one thing that we should be aware of. As you know, the book of Judges is full of a lot of warnings for us to not to emulate, in our life. And when you read throughout the Bible, when you read throughout like the book of Judges, we should always look for the principles that we can follow. Like, you're never going to, I hope you're never going to assassinate anyone or try to kill someone. That's not something that we're going to do. But if you think about the principle here, and you think about the warnings and the good things that we can take from this, there's so much wisdom, there's so much goodness in the Bible that we shouldn't just skip over certain sections because we may not think that they apply to us. But you can learn a lot from what we find in the Holy Word of God. But Eglon here, he thought that he was on top of the world. He thought that he had everything that a man could have. He was he had a great kingdom. He had conquered nations. He had great wealth. He had it made. He had everything. And what was there to worry about? What was there even to be concerned about here in this case? And then as he was receiving this tribute, he was receiving more stuff, more wealth. In the blink of an eye, in just an instant, all that goes away, and he is killed by Ehud. You think that he was prepared for that? We know he wasn't, because he would have taken steps to stop it. But rather, because it happened so fast, because it happened with the deceitfulness of Ehud, he was caught unaware, and he paid the consequences for it. And so there's two things we need to be warned about here in this case. And that is, first of is, don't be, don't, of course, there's the element of pride, as we know, not to be someone who thinks that, we're too big to fall, or we're too successful to fall, or that we have too much for things to get us down. Because as we see how the fortunes change for this powerful and great man, it was so fast, in the blink of an eye, that this took place. And so don't put such confidence in your own strength or in the things that you have, or the reputation that you have, or any of the things of this world. Don't put so much confidence in those things that you think that they will carry you through, because as we see here, in the blink of an eye, that can all go away. And second is, are we prepared for that? Are we going to be prepared for what's going to happen in the future? God has told us what's going to happen. He's told us what the future of a Christian is. That when our time to go is here, and during that day you have judgment, we will have to give an account to God for what we have used this life for. This life that He has blessed us with, we have to tell Him how we used it, and the things that we have done, both good and bad. We know that's coming. We know that is going to be in our future, and we know that Jesus is going to come back to this earth one day, and that the purpose of this earth, the usefulness of this earth, is not going to be eternal, but it's going to have a time when it's going to go away, and where Jesus is going to come back one day, and we will have to face that. And so, what will happen if we are unprepared on that day? What will happen if we are found to be surprised, or we are found to be shocked by the happening of that? The Bible is very clear about what happens to those who are unprepared during that day of judgment. And we have been warned, we have been told, we have been informed that this is in our future. And so we have to be prepared. We have to be someone who is ready. And because we know that there's, as far as life goes and the things that happens in life, you can't be prepared for everything. Sometimes life throws things at you that are you're from left field. Sometimes things just happen, and you can't be prepared for everything. But in this case, when it comes to your spiritual life, that you can be prepared for. You can be ready for. And you won't be like Eglon, who thought he had it all and lost everything in an instant. We want to be someone who gives our life, to the gospel, to God, so that we may gain something much greater, that crown of life, that holy name that God can give. That's what we want. That's what we desire. Don't follow the example of Eglon, but be someone who is prepared, someone who is ready, for that day. And as we see here, with Ehud is not exactly a spiritual leader, is he? Not much is mentioned in the story about his faithfulness or about his, spiritual leadership. Not much is mentioned about it at all. After he leaves and after he escapes from the palace, down here in verses 27 and following, it says, when he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And so they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time 10,000 Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. And so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. And so after this, assassination, Ehud kind of sounds the trumpet, he puts the call out, and he leads Israel against Moab, and they are successful. And so Ehud is a great, military leader, and he does give credit to God here in this case. He says, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And so he may have been a more spiritual person than the text kind of gives out, but, we don't know. But he was someone who God used to be a deliverer. And one thing that we're probably going to mention in every single episode as we look at these judges and we look at what they did, one thing that is present in almost every single one of their stories is that God can use all types of people. God can use anyone, and for his purpose and for his goodness. And Ehud, this left-handed Benjamite became a deliverer of Israel through what he was able to do, and through his ability to deceive the people and to be crafty enough in order to kill the king, while the king thought he had everything. God can use all types of people, and so we need to be ready for him to use us when the time comes. And even though Israel was oppressed for 18 years instead of 8 years, while they only had 40 years of rest after, I believe, after Othniel, they only had 40 years. But after the exploits of Ehud, it says the land had rest for 80 years. And so they had doubled the amount of rest after this, trial. And they were able to rejoice in that fact that they had rest for 80 years. If you're someone who works for God, if you're someone who is dedicated, someone who seeks to work for the kingdom, God will give us rest. We have that rest to look forward to, and it won't be 40 years, won't be 80 years, but it will be for an eternity. And that's going to be a great, great thing to look forward to. But I think that's going to wrap up our look at Ehud here. And you can let me know what you think about this judge and about what he did here in with Israel, and maybe the lessons that we can learn from it. Next week, we'll take a look at Shamgar. As you see, we're told a whole lot about Shamgar, all one verse of this judge. But we'll take a look at him, see what we can gather from him. But I appreciate everyone being here tonight, and as always, we thank you for your time. You could be doing a whole lot of other things on this Thursday night, but we so appreciate you taking a short amount of time to study with us here tonight. We'll be back here, I believe next week. Yeah, we'll be back here next week, 7:00 Central Standard Time. We will have another episode of the Midweek Bible Study, and so hopefully you can join us then. And we can continue to dig into the Word of God. But until then, appreciate everyone. Appreciate Sandy. Hope that you are doing well, and hope that you all can go out and glorify God in all that you do and be that light of the world. Catch you next time.